Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure and privilege to reintroduce Dr. Mrinalini Kothru. She is an MD and a DM in hematopathology, professor at the Department of Pathology at the UCMS Delhi, and she will be telling us about an approach to bleeding disorders.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I now begin with a very simple but yet a very important talk for all the pathologists, that is approach to bleeding disorders. Like we all know that in our clinical and hematology settings, we get a lot of patients where there is bleeding, which ranges from mild bleeding tendency to sometimes life-threatening bleeding tendencies also. And the challenge to the pathologist as well as a clinician is to distinguish what is the underlying pathology so that the modality of treatment can be made. So today I'll be focusing basically on how to go about dealing with a patient who has come with a mild bleeding tendency. We all know that whenever we deal about bleeding tendencies in our minds, from our undergraduate teaching itself, it is divided into three parts of hemostasis, that is platelets, the abnormalities of the platelets, the vessel walls, and the clotting defects. And why is it important for us to identify these three aspects is because the kind of bleeding which the patient presents with clotting defects is different from those with platelets and vessel wall defects. So whenever there is a problem with the platelets as well as the vessel wall, it is labeled into disorders of primary hemostasis, and there can be vessel wall abnormalities and there can be platelet disorders which can be qualitative as well as quantitative. Quantitative, like thrombocytopenia, it is one of the most commonly encountered laboratory finding or the CBC finding in any inpatient which we deal with. Then the disorders of secondary hemostasis, uh, hemophilia and von Willebrand disease, we are all very well aware of, but there are a host of acquired bleeding disorders which present with clotting like defects. So, what is the approach to it? The approach is to first assess it clinically and then go to the lab. So, even if we are pathologists, we are more or being a hematologist gives us a thing that we have to know about the clinical of the patient. We have to see what kind of presentation it is, what is the degree of bleeding, and there are a lot of scores which are available to distinguish whether it's a mild bleeding disorder or a severe bleeding disorder which requires intervention in terms of replacement with FFP or platelets or sometimes RCC also. And then the type of bleeding and the sites from which the bleeding is involved. And I'll briefly discuss why this is important. And then also we have to take a good history to know whether are we dealing with some inherited bleeding disorder or is it a acquired bleeding disorder which the patient is coming with. Only when we are made up of our minds on these three should we order a laboratory test accordingly, because there are a whole lot of investigations which can be done in this regard, and it can be quite haphazard if we don't deal with it logically. So the clinical presentation. So these are pictures of how various kinds of bleeding patients come up with petechiae, purpura, ecchymosis, and hemarthrosis with also deformity because of recurrent hemarthrosis. So when a patient walks into the clinic, you need to assess whether it is superficial or mucosal bleeding or whether it is deep ecchymotic bleeding or bleeding in the joints. Why is it important to know? It is because the disorders of primary hemostasis, that is, when there is a platelet defect or a vessel wall defect, present mostly with superficial bleeds, milder bleeds, and which are limited to the mucosal sites as well as the skin, whereas the disorders of the coagulation have more extensive bleeding, They are more deeply situated in the and cause hematomas in the soft tissues as well as in the joints. So we need to take proper history and examine the patient for presence of petechiae, deep dissecting hematoma, superficial ecchymosis, hemarthrosis, delayed bleeding. Yes, this is a very important part in the history which we need to take, is because when there is a disorder of primary hemostasis, by applying pressure, immediately the bleeding might stop. Whereas when it is a disorder of secondary hemostasis or coagulation, then what happens is that it may initially not bleed, but the bleeding starts after a time and it takes a longer time for it to stop. So all these points in history are important. Also, family history is very important, and family history most likely will be elicited in disorders of coagulation as compared to disorders of platelets and vessels. So then how do we proceed? So I told you, once we have made up our mind about the degree of bleeding, about the type of bleeding, whether it is a disorder of primary hemostasis or secondary hemostasis, and also whether probably it is patient is giving a positive family history, we decide in our mind that what kind of a disorder we are dealing with, and then accordingly we advise for a battery of tests. And then, as you can see in this picture, we have disorders of primary hemostasis for which assessment of platelet count is important, and also PFA 100 in certain centers if it is available. And then for further workup, we have secondary line of testing. In secondary hemostasis evaluation, APTT, PT, and fibrinogen is important. And then further, whatever data comes from that, we advise for further second line of investigation. And then there are global tests, which are also, some of them are point of care testing, which you require in, say, various cardiac surgeries, etc., where we need to know in real time what is happening to the clotting coagulation system. So, whatever be the case, the best way is to do a screening coagulogram for all patients. And a screening coagulogram, a basic one, consists of platelet count, of the prothrombin time, and APTT. So, this is the basic which has to be done in any hospital setting, even if it is not specialized. This is the must have in any hospital. And then additionally, thrombin time and serum fibrinogen. Bleeding time also has some value in some settings, so that can be retained because it is easily done and can give information if it is prolonged. If it is normal, then we cannot say much, but if it is prolonged, it still gives us some information. So it can still be retained, but platelet count, PT and APTT solves half of a problem and gives us direction in which to go. So briefly, I'll be discussing about the screening coagulogram and tell that what are the advantages and what information needs to be taken from these various parameters which are being discussed in this. So bleeding time, I told you, has some value. The only problem is that there is appropriate standardization is not done, and when it is normal, it cannot rule out a bleeding tendency. But definitely, if it is prolonged, it will tell that there is either a vessel wall abnormality or a platelet abnormality, and especially when you have platelet counts which are normal, it gives us idea that probably then we are dealing with a platelet function defect. So that is the value of doing a bleeding time when we don't have very good resources for doing very specialized tests for platelets. Plus, when you are doing tests like these, it is important to know the history of drugs, whether the patient is on any NSAIDs, aspirin, because that will definitely increase the bleeding time per se, and you won't be able to distinguish between whether it is pathological or because of the drug. So when you're approaching a case of mild bleeding, especially which is skin or mucosal, then and in a resource poor setting, bleeding time is of some value, especially, I again repeat, especially when it is uh, increased. When it is normal, it is not of much help. Then coming to clotting time, traditionally, long time back, it was being taught in various medical schools, but now it has become redundant. But in very resource poor settings where we don't have access to uh, in especially in the primary health centers, this can be a rapid test without much in reagent input which is required, which will help you say that probably there is some problem in the clotting pathway. So I'm not going into the details of it because it has become redundant for all practical purposes in most of the areas in India. It is of some value in very, very remote places which still don't have access to a lot of reagents and other sophisticated instruments. Coming to platelet count. Platelet count is integral to assessment of any patient or bleeding disorder. Even if the patient is having showing symptoms of clotting, still you need to do platelet count. Why? Because von Willebrand disease is a disease in which there can be platelet abnormalities and thrombocytopenia, which so when you are evaluating APTT along with platelet count, it will give you a hint that probably you're dealing with a VWD and not mislead into a diagnosis of hemophilia. So whenever you are taking a screening coagulogram, it is not PT and APTT only. Platelet count always has to be taken into account when you are giving the final diagnosis. So, as Dr. Handu said, that there are various automated instruments which assess the platelet count, and the optical platelets are better. But I must admit that many of the centers still don't have access to such sophisticated instruments. So always it should be confirmed, and it should be seen also on the peripheral smear to see what kind of whether it's actually true thrombocytopenia or not, because sometimes large platelets by traditional impedance methods cause artifactual thrombocytopenia because of counting larger platelets into the microcytes. So therefore, the platelets are undercounted, and we need to confirm it by by peripheral smear examination. So this is approach to thrombocytopenia, and again I would like to say that whenever you have thrombocytopenia, which is on counters, you need to evaluate the blood smear to exclude spurious thrombocytopenia, and also see whether the patient has any clinical history of recent chemotherapy, radiotherapy, or drugs, or hemodilution, or so many other things which could attribute to directly lowering of thrombocytopenia. And if yes, then you don't need to work it up further. But if no, and there are other parameters in the coagulogram which are normal, that means you have normal PT and APTT, and the patient is having mucosal and skin bleeds only, then you need to perform a megakaryocyte, you need to perform a bone marrow examination and see for megakaryocytes, that and any other bone marrow disease which is leading to the suppression of platelets. So any infiltrative disorder or anything, or if it is normal and increase, then you start thinking of diseases which lead to platelet destruction. So that is how the approach to thrombocytopenia with other parameters or in the screening coagulogram which are normal, you do it. And also you see for DIC, TTP, drugs, SLE, etc. If that all has been ruled out, then ITP is the diagnosis for you. And that will explain the cause of mucosal bleed. So if there is thrombocytopenia and the patient on history is giving that there is increase in bleeding tendency from childhood and quite early in age, then you need to see the peripheral smear for other reasons also, and also look at the CBC parameters in which the MPV is given. For example, a case of thrombocytopenia in which seems to be congenital and MPV is low, that means it has small platelet size, then Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome is one thing which you should think of. And if it is high, then Barnard-Solier is the thing which you should think of. So microscopy is hence important for confirming thrombocytopenia as well as platelet morphology. And in this case, when you see the platelets in BSS, you can see that it is large platelets which are seen almost to the size of RBC. So that will clinch the diagnosis that the patient is a congenital bleeding tendency, superficial bleeding tendency, mucosal bleeding tendency, and MPV is high, and there are large platelets on the peripheral smear, and there is no other condition. Screening coglogram shows PT and APTT, which is normal, and platelet counts, which are low, and this is the platelet morphology which you see. So it is BSS. Again, here you can see are almost invisible gray platelets. So it is pointing towards gray platelet syndrome in a similar kind of a setup. So that is how you approach any case of bleeding tendency step by step. Again, I'll repeat, assess whether it is mucosal or uh, deep tissue bleeding or joint bleeds, and also see whether it looks like an inherited cause or acquired cause, and then assess systematically. So thrombocytopenia, then if you have ruled out all these things, then if you have seen the morphology, you then go into the bone marrow examination. This is another case where the history was elicited that it was post-splenectomy ITP, and this is a very large platelet. And you don't diagnose this as BSS even if the MPV is high, because you have taken a proper history, and history shows that the patient is post-splenectomy. So that is the value of uh, approaching a bleeding disorder right from the clinical onwards, and not jumping to just a morphological finding or a laboratory finding. Here, along with thrombocytopenia, these are the schistocytes which are seen. So definitely we don't need to do a bone marrow in this case. We know we are dealing with a thrombotic microangiopathy. So if the screening test shows that platelet counts are normal, there is a mucosal bleed, and PT and APTT are normal, then we move towards the second line of tests which will evaluate the platelet hemostatic function. And I told you bleeding time is a very primitive uh, test for doing it, which has very low sensitivity as well as specificity, but yet in some resourceful settings we can do it, but mostly it is PFA which can give us a lot of information, and platelet aggregometry. So these two come under the umbrella of platelet function test. So in PFA, we use the whole blood through it moves through the capillary device and mimics high shear conditions that occur in vivo. So it is mimicking in vivo conditions. And what is the measurement is the closure time, because when the blood flows through the mesh, and when it stops flowing, that is the closure time, and it tells that whether the platelets have got aggregated and primary hemostasis has occurred. And there are two types of cartridges. One is coated with epinephrine and one with ADP. And both are assessed while evaluating PFA. So when both are normal, then we can almost rule out any severe defects in primary hemostasis. But if one is prolonged, especially only the cartridge which has epinephrine, then we should rule out a drug effect and milder bleeding defects like mild VWD, mild platelet function defects, or thrombocytopenia. And if uh, cartridge with epinephrine is also along with ADP is prolonged, then severe disorders of primary hemostasis should be considered. Then more specific one is the platelet aggregometry, which measures either by impedance or light transmission. I'm not going into the principles of it, but just to say that we have different agonists like ADP, thrombin, ristocetin, and adrenaline to know that which part of platelet addition and aggregation is at fault and what is causing defect in the platelet function. So accordingly, uh, once we add agonist, there is a shape change and a primary wave followed by release of nucleotides, and then this aggregation is sets up and causes a secondary wave. So then the interpretation is made accordingly that like in this graph, if you see that when adding ADP or adrenaline, uh, adrenaline, now ristocetin, there is a defect in ristocetin, there is a lack of aggregation, and therefore in this case the defect is either a Barnard Collier or a VWD. Now in this case, how are we going to solve this problem is because we have taken a proper history and we have seen that there is thrombocytopenia and giant platelets, and we just need to confirm it. So that is why we have done this test. In VWD, there will be different kind of screening, depending on the type of VWD, it will show a different kind of a system. Similarly, Glanzmann, thrombocytopenia, and afibrinogenemia will lead to suppression of aggregation by all the uh, agonists, but ristocetin will be more or less normal or slightly suppressed. And in storage pool disease, again, there will be suppression by all the agonists and defective nucleotide release. So that is how when we are doing aggregometry, uh, we are able to pinpoint the exact kind of platelet function defect which may occur. And that is why this is probably more popular than PFA when it comes to assessment of platelet function defect. Then coming to flow cytometry in platelet disorders, yes, we can diagnose Glanzmann's, Bernard Collier, and also very dynamic platelet changes and all can be recorded by flow cytometry, but yet they have not become very popular except Glanzmann's and Bernard Collier, in which you are just knowing that whether the receptors are present or not, and diagnostic reports are generated in higher centers which are dealing with platelet disorders. So this brings me to the end of this part of my talk, which tells us how to work up a patient of primary hemostasis, meaning mainly the platelet disorders, whether it is quantitative or qualitative. And the point here again is to assess the clinical condition, whether it is secondary mucosal site or skin bleeding or deep bleeding, which helps us decide which limb of hemostasis we are dealing with. And also doing a basic screening coglogram, which tells us that apart from the platelet count, PT and APTT are normal. And when platelet count is also normal, then maybe we need to do a platelet function test. Then coming to prothrombin time. Prothrombin time, we all know that it measures the extrinsic pathway. I'm not going to the details of the methodology. This is how manually we assess the clot formation, but now we have sophisticated instruments, semi-automated and coaglometers, as well as fully automated coaglometers, and this is the normal range. But definitely always when we are doing a platelet count, PT, we always do it with the control and give the report along with the control time to assess so that whether uh, how much derangement an abnormal result has from the control. So the causes we all know are any problems which can lead to extrinsic or common pathway defect will lead to prolonged PT. So oral anticoagulants, liver disease, vitamin K deficiency, DIC, factor 7, and factor 2, 5, and 10 deficiency. Now, when there's a factor 2, 5, and 10 deficiency, apart from PT, APTT will also be prolonged. So this means that when we are doing screening coagulogram and if we are assessing PT as well as APTT, we know where we are standing, because if APTT is also prolonged, then maybe we are dealing just with the deficiencies in this. Whereas if APTT is normal, then we know that there is a defect in factor 7 only. So that is the value of doing all these tests together and assessing them together. Then coming to APTT, again, it has similar principle as PT, except that we are incubating it initially with activators, and it assesses the intrinsic pathway as well as the common pathway. So when APTT is prolonged, then all the factors can be deficient except factor 7. And if PT is also prolonged with it, then we know that we are dealing with 10, 5, or 2. And if it is only isolated, then we know that we are dealing with these defects. Plus, if we also know the clinical, for example, if the patient has, say, joint bleeds, then we know that it is defects. But for example, patient has mild joint bleeds and also mucosal bleeds and is a female, for example, then we know that it is thrombin time is is good to have but not must to have in a screening coagulogram, and it will help you distinguish whether it is different, whether it is the bleeding is caused by factor 10 or 5 or 2. So if TT is prolonged, then you know that it is fibrinogen and thrombin, last part of the coagulation cascade, which is affected, and it is prolonged in hyperfibrinogenemia, dysfibrinogenemia, FDPs, heparin, etc. Serum fibrinogen. It's also a good to have test. Uh, we can do without it, but it provides lot of valuable information, especially when we are working up a case of DIC, and it helps us know how low the fibrinogen is. So it also sensitive to inherited dysfibrinogenemia. But of course we can reserve it later if we just limit ourselves to PT, APTT, and platelet count. So now, if we have a prolonged PT and APTT, then what should we do next? We all know that all the clotting and coagulation tests are subject to lot of pre-analytical variables as well as analytical variables if we are doing it manually. So just relying on one abnormal test is not good. We always need to repeat the test, especially if it is not matching with the clinical presentation of the patient. So again, the stress is on the clinical also, as giving any report without the clinical input and taking that into account can be dangerous when we are sitting in a coagulation laboratory. So repeat testing always, and if it is normal, then no more testing if it is not matching with the clinical. But if the abnormal report has been validated by next repeat test, then of course we need to do further testing. We need to know also the patient's systemic disease status. So maybe the doctor in the coagulation laboratory calls up the clinician who has sent the requisition to know about the clinical status, that what is wrong with the patient, whether he's on some drugs or whether he has some liver disease or something like that. If there is some other problem like this, then our approach will change accordingly. So then the post analysis, always compare it with the controls. So PT is normal within 3 seconds of control, APT within 5 seconds, and TT within 2 seconds of control. And normal ranges, we have to be aware, are different for neonates and children. So that chart always needs to be there, because the normals for neonates and children vary with different age. So that needs to be interpreted accordingly. Also, we should always be aware that, for example, a patient is having mild bleeding tendencies and our laboratory investigations are showing a normal result. So we should be aware that if there is a 50% reduction in the activity of factors, they can still not be picked up by routine tests. So maybe we need to go to the factor assays directly in those cases. So milder deficiencies will be missed. Also, whether the patient had come to the laboratory after exercising, had walked a distance and then come, because it's going to give rise to a falsely elevated factor rate, or has some inflammatory condition elsewhere, or is pregnant, or is on oral contraceptives. That needs to be understood. Also, for example, in case we are suspecting VWD, we need to know the blood group of the patient, because O has slightly increased factor VIII levels. So that may give us some erroneous kinds of reading. So all these have to be analyzed in the light of clinical background. So this is to summarize that if we have only PT abnormality, then factor 7 needs to be considered. APTT, I've just told you, if both are abnormal, then factor 5, 10, prothrombin and fibrinogen. And the last two can be figured out if we do an additional TT test also. Then thrombocytopenia, I explained you the complete workup and when bone marrow is required for the same. And if no abnormalities are detected, apart from platelet function, there can be milder factor deficiencies as well as factor 13 deficiency. Now, factor 13 patient will be a symptomatic patient and will present with bleeding in the with quite serious bleeds. And when you get a normal laboratory result, you need to do a clot solubility to find out whether the patient is having a factor 13 deficiency, or maybe go directly for a factor 13 assay. So that is the value of doing all these things step by step, as I've discussed. So if you are not going directly for a factor assay in laboratory still, because these are expensive and maybe we don't get uh, a lot of patients, we only get in specialized referral centers, but in most of tertiary hospitals these rare factor deficiencies uh, don't come so common, and it may not be economically viable to have kits for them. So we go for a mixing study in this case, to find out whether it is a deficiency or an inhibitor. And by mixing normal plasma, if the PT APTT comes to normal or near normal, then we know we are dealing with a deficiency. And if it is not coming to normal, then we know we are dealing with an inhibitor. And then accordingly we go further, whether it is a time dependent inhibitor like a factor 8 inhibitor, or a lupus inhibitor, or some drug effect. So there are various parameters by which you assess for the corrections. And if you do mixing with serum or adsorbed plasma, we are able to figure out whether we are dealing with a factor 8 or a factor 9 deficiency. But still, for clinical management we need to do factor assays to know that the level of factor 8 or factor 9 activity so that the management can depend accordingly. For example, less than 1% factor VIII activity means we are dealing with a severe hemophilia, whereas 1 to 5 is moderate. So even if we have done a mixing study at a center which is not specialized, in a higher center when the patient is referred to, he has to undergo a factor VIII or a 9 assay depending on what the patient is having. So to summarize, again, we have a clinical history. We figure out whether it is a platelet or a clotting type of a deficiency, and then a screening coglogram. And then when we have figured out that this screen increasing bleeding tendency is because of platelet inherited or acquired, we work up accordingly, like I just discussed. And there are various causes of thrombocytopenia which are there, and we need to take a good clinical history and do other additional markers to find out. Similarly, if we have figured out it's a clotting type of a defect and inherited, then these are the common ones which are present. And then the workup will include the same thing, a CBC, a coagulation screen, and assay, and also inhibitor screen if we are doing follow-up of hemophilia patients. Similarly, if we are suspecting a VWD, then specific further tests need to be worked out, which is VWD antigen, recough, factor VIII, VWD multiples, which are not done routinely. But then this is how then the further testing for VWD is done. This brings me to the end of this talk, and I hope I've been able to explain the approach and stress upon the need of correlating the clinical as well as with the laboratory finding. Thank you.
See, one question that has been asked by Isaac Sinha, that's the one question I think we can take. To establish a factor 2, 5 or 10 deficiency, how much prolonged PT, APTT time threshold to consider?
Pardon?
The question is, to establish factor 2, 5 or 10 deficiency, how much of prolonged PT, APTT time threshold would you like to consider? How much away from the normal?
No, the abnormal APTT threshold remains always the same. It is only that further workup when we do, we find out. Otherwise, it doesn't vary from what the underlying factor deficiency is.
Thank you. I hope, Dr. Isaac, that answers your question. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a short question?
Yes, sir. It has to be very short.
Very short. In the past, when you have a complicated patient, before the surgery, we were doing the IV time or Duke or clotting time as a global test to measure everything. Which test you will recommend and which for this situation when you have to evaluate a patient pre-surgery?
For global test, in specialized centers, especially the cardiac centers and all, thromboelastography is done. That's a point of care instrument. Every step, which kind of a defect is there. So that is done. But as of now, in most of the centers, real time, other things are not available.
Okay.
So I think, sir,
Thank
most
you.
of us do with the platelet count, prothrombin time and an APTT. That's what we usually do for all our operative patients.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.